Lee, you have a second pick, another player. Which group are we going to for this one?
It's the group that I call the group of death, and it's not Germany, Portugal, and France, but of course it's a group with England and Scotland and Croatia and the Czech Republic, because I couldn't come on the podcast to talk about players under 23 and not talk about Billy Gilmour.
90 minutes. It's probably the shortest period of time that anyone has had that's going to be discussed on this podcast. But absolutely, he has to be discussed after the. I mean, I'll have lots of people taking the mickey out of me for saying the 0-0 trophy that Scotland won against England and whatnot. Leave it out. Let us just have this. You know what? Let's just have Billy Gilmour for the 90 minutes that he played.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think prior to the squad announcement, there was a lot of talk that Gilmour would make it. Obviously, a lot of talk also about the fact that Ryan Gold didn't make it. Um, Not a decision that I agreed with. I think that Gold showed himself to be, for those that don't know him, Ryan Gold is an attacking midfielder or a wide player who was playing for, I believe it was Firenze in the Portuguese top flight this season. He moved initially from Dundee United to Sporting Lisbon, but had a couple of loan spells. There was a disagreement with the ownership of Sporting at one point and a little bit of bad blood, and he's been this past season one of the most creative and impressive players in the Portuguese top flight, particularly when you take out the big three of Sporting, Benfica, and Porto. Ryan Gold didn't make the squad, and that caused analytical Twitter to go into a little bit of a meltdown, which I understood, but I also understood that this was a squad that was being picked by Steve Clarke, and for all that I have a great deal of admiration for the job that Steve Clarke has done for Scotland. Obviously, he was our coach who got us back to the tournament after 23 years of not being there. But I don't think that creative attacking players in the final third are really his thing, if you like. You saw that Ryan Christie only really played significant minutes in the first match and looked promising before being substituted. Um, David Turnbull didn't get a look in, and he was another player who people thought could affect the game a little bit in that final third. Um, there was a clamour for Billy Gilmour though to start, and I think that we all saw why in that England game. Um, he just after the first 10 minutes, I think the first 10 minutes, the atmosphere for all that Billy Gilmour has played huge games for Chelsea, played the Champions League. He's been around the first team for the whole season now. I still think that first 10 minutes against England winded him a little bit. The size of the occasion, the crowd, the build up, everything, and you saw he was just taking it all in more than anything else. But after that, he was peerless for me on the pitch, and that goes a long way when you think about the players that he was up against. Every time the ball moved into Billy Gilmour, Scotland calmed down, and that is what he gives you. And for a 20-year-old kid still to be able to give you that in the biggest game of his life speaks volumes about his technical, tactical ability, but also his character. Because whenever he received the ball, he always had time. First touch was always to the safe side, even under pressure. He was press resistant, he was twisting and turning, moving away, and he always made the right choices with the pass off. Um, it was interesting last night because before the match, ITV split the coverage. So if you're in Scotland, you got slightly dodgy coverage that didn't impress many people. But Gordon Strachan was on the panel for those in Scotland, and he talked about the fact that Stuart Armstrong would give you something different for Billy Gilmour, because Billy Gilmour would just receive and pass, and Armstrong would drive forward with the ball. But what we needed was to have Billy Gilmour there to receive and pass last night. We needed to have a player in the midfield who could match the technique of the Croatians, and we didn't have that. For all that Callum McGregor tried hard to replicate that role and scored a really good goal, we didn't have that presence in the midfield that made the Croatians sit back and worry, if you like, because they didn't think that we could break their lines from that central zone without a run from John McGinn. That there wasn't a passer in there that could break the lines and really threaten, and that's what Billy Gilmour would give you. But it's a mark of the impact that he had in the tournament from a Scotland perspective, from a scouted perspective, from an just a casual onlooker's perspective. Billy Gilmour ran the game against a side whose talent was absolutely levels above on the pitch what Scotland had. I'm not a Scotsman who is in any way not even so much anti-English, because I don't think that's as much of a thing as people think it is. But I'm not a Scottish fan who doesn't understand what England have in terms of talent. And for all that they haven't played that well this tournament, you still cannot question the level of talent they have. But Billy Gilmour looked like he could play at that level, and that says a lot. I think that this coming season is going to be really, really interesting for Gilmour. I think that for all that Frank Lampard had his naysayers while he was at Chelsea, he did bring through young players, and it was Frank Lampard who gave Billy Gilmour his first minutes in the first team at Chelsea. Thomas Tuchel's come in, and Tuchel's kept him around the first team squad. He's picked up minutes here and there, but not to the extent that we might have expected. If you take Damsgaard, for example, that we just talked about, he, like I said, he played over 2,000 minutes last season. Billy Gilmour only played 842 minutes total for Chelsea last season. There's been a lot of talk about him going out on loan, but if he does so, he needs to be advised properly, which previously, I think, if we go back 5, 10 years, I think that a lot of players went on what I would term bad loans. They went to clubs who didn't fit their playing style, who didn't necessarily have space at their position, clubs who didn't trust young players or didn't have the time to help these young players to bed in. I think that now, as football is now, I mean, I certainly, with my work for Total Football Analysis, we advise clubs and we advise agents on potential loan destinations for their young players. So clubs, agents, players are getting a lot smarter about what they do with their career and the moves that they make. But I think that Billy Gilmour has to be really careful. He can't move to just any old club. That there's going to be possibly more interest now than there would have been prior to the tournament because of the uproar around how well he played. But I think he has to be careful with the club that he chooses, and not just to choose a Premier League club without thinking about it to go out on loan. For example, a move to Brighton would be ideal for Billy Gilmour. I think he'd get minutes at Brighton. I think he'd be a good first team player for them, and I think that he would develop in that system under Graham Potter. Whereas a move to a Newcastle or a move to a Crystal Palace, where it's more transitional, the midfield doesn't see as much of the ball, it wouldn't aid his development as much. So I think that we just need to be careful. Gilmour needs to think about his future a little bit more. Chelsea need to protect what they have and just give him a chance to get first team minutes. If he's not going to be part of the first team picture on a regular basis, and I mean getting those 2,000 minutes next season for Chelsea, I think he really needs to look to go out on loan.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Lee, and I think it's there's. I take on board what you said, but I think there's no doubt that he will be playing Premier League football next season.
Yeah,
Again, I just think it does need to be at a club where that's going to be, it's going to facilitate the his development. And obviously, we've seen links in the past few days to Norwich City, which I can see. I can see going one of two ways really, because I think there will be an element of Norwich that will be transitional next season. Um, I think the signing of Milo Rashica kind of indicates that they are anticipating that they're going to have to absorb a lot and play very similar to the way that Werder Bremen did on the break with Rashica, and to get the best out of him. But at the same time, Norwich are in the market for somebody who's going to be that tempo dictator, that getting their foot on the ball, as you say, taking the touch on the safe side, all of those sorts of things. If they can't retain Ollie Skip, who had a fantastic year there in the Championship and helped them get promoted. But with Gilmour, going back to the England game, he was brilliant. I think there was probably a little bit of an overreaction, but at the same time, there's that's only natural because it was a great performance. And then you look at the contrast between that game and the Croatia game, and you look at Luka Modric had 117 touches. Marcelo Brozovic had 97. Mateo Kovacic had 89. Now, when your three midfielders are having that much dominance over the centre of the pitch, you really are up against it. And I mean, just looking at every single statistic, which would have been, maybe not massively different, but in some way would have 100% would have been different had Gilmour been there. That Scotland, Andy Robertson and Kieran Tierney were the players who had the most touches for Scotland, 53 each. Scott McTominay had 46, Callum McGregor had 42, and then it was David Marshall had 37. The entire Scotland team had as many successful dribbles as Mateo Kovacic in the entire game. This was a game in which the midfield was overrun, and you think, a few England players dribbled past Billy Gilmour in the first game. Yes, but whenever Scotland did get on the ball and it was fed into him, it was almost like a safe haven, as you were saying. And it was the team could then think, right, I don't need to immediately go to the ball. I don't need to go to the man. I can then think about where I can get into space because I know it's in safe hands. It'll be recycled safely and securely. Whereas I think against Croatia, it was we need to get this ball as quickly up the pitch as possible. And that simply just didn't work, and it ended up becoming strained and fraught, and lots of bouncy high balls being chucked into Lyndon Dykes and Shea Adams, and yeah, it was Scotland definitely missed Gilmour, and admittedly, I think Scotland missed Gilmour more than I thought that he'd be missed. So I mean, that's a reflection of a 20-year-old coming into the Scotland team, and if you're looking at this through rose tinted specs, then you're thinking, well, Gilmour is absolutely going to be integral to the Scottish national team for the next decade and a bit, based on one 90-minute game. Provided he can stay fit, provided he gets regular minutes somewhere, he's only going to get better. But yeah, I think that was a harsh lesson in how vital and how very Scotland it was that after 90 minutes of fantastic performance, the only player that really mattered in the final game went and got COVID. But hey, that's just the way it goes sometimes. But
I think I saw somebody tweet that Billy Gilmour getting COVID after that performance was more Scottish than deep fried tablet. And for anyone who doesn't know what tablet is, I believe you spent your uni years up in Scotland, Joe. So I'm fairly sure you've had tablet at some point in your life. But it is an incredibly sweet, sugar based, almost baked good, if you like. It is incredibly bad for you, and no doubt somebody in Scotland has attempted to deep fry it.
of course, what hasn't been, but yeah, he's he's Scotland's, unfortunately for Billy Gilmour, but I'm sure he'll be appearing at another major tournament in no time at all. Hopefully, fingers crossed, please.